Hey there. Welcome to a deep dive into global food insecurity. You've given us some really fascinating excerpts from John Martin Bauer's book, New W, The New Breadline, Hunger and Hope in this. We're ready to get into it.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting deep dive for sure. I mean,
Yeah,
we often see these simplified narratives around hunger,
for sure.
and I think Bauer really takes us, beyond those headlines.
Absolutely. And right from the start, I mean, he brings us to Haiti.
Yeah.
With this wild story of this warehouse looting,
Right?
where a mob, not only are they taking this desperately needed food aid, but they're destroying it.
Yeah.
And we're talking food that could have fed 100,000 children.
It's a challenging thing to kind of wrap your head around
It is.
because it really does challenge some of our, I think, preconceived notions of, how hunger works.
Right.
And what are the sort of forces at play.
It's not as simple as we might think.
Not at all. In fact, Bauer highlights this trend that's really quite disturbing, actually,
Okay.
of aid workers increasingly becoming targets.
Wow.
Facing suspicion,
Yeah.
sometimes even violence,
Yeah.
and not just in sort of, far off places.
Right.
This is happening more and more, even in a country like the U.S., where, surprisingly to some, food insecurity is on the rise.
Yeah, definitely something to think about. It's not just about, this lack of food. It's really about these systems that are in place
Absolutely.
and how those are functioning, or rather malfunctioning.
Yeah, and the breakdown of trust.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a huge factor.
And then beyond that, the immediate crisis, of can people get food? Bauer really takes us deep into this human cost of hunger
Yeah.
by exploring the science behind starvation.
And he does it in this really interesting way, I think, where he connects it to things that, we might be familiar with. For example, like ketosis, something that, a lot of people experience when they're, intentionally dieting.
Right.
And he points out that, that state of ketosis, often associated with, mental fogginess,
Yeah.
that's a very real consequence of starvation.
Yeah.
And that's really just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
Because when the body is deprived of food for extended periods, I mean, it essentially starts to consume itself.
Yeah, it's a grim picture for sure.
It is. It's, first it goes for the muscle, but eventually.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from those hard realities.
No.
He even brings in Marguerite Duras' really harrowing account of nursing her husband back to health after his experience in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp.
Yeah.
And the details there about, even when food was available.
Right.
He had such a difficult time, even being able to keep food down. It paints a picture of that long-term impact.
The lasting physical and psychological damage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can imagine, I mean, for children, these effects are especially devastating. Bauer really drives home this point, that a generation that experiences hunger
Right.
is a generation robbed of its full potential,
Yeah.
facing, potentially lifelong consequences.
It's a sobering thought. So we go from this really stark picture of, this is the crisis, this is the human cost. And then Bauer really skillfully, I think, takes us to specific regions around the globe,
He does.
starting with the Sahel region of Africa.
And he does it so brilliantly by, I think, again, bringing in that human element.
Mm-hmm.
He introduces us to Sid Ahmed, a Mauritanian official,
Okay.
who very passionately proclaims that, quote, cattle are life.
Cattle are life.
Yeah, and it's such a simple statement,
Right.
but it speaks volumes, I think,
It does.
about how deeply intertwined food security is with culture, with identity, with survival
Absolutely.
in these regions.
And the Sahel really presents a very complex picture because you have these very sort of, deeply rooted cultural elements, but then you have this very real threat of climate change.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, that image of the elephant skull outside the Nigerian government building,
Yeah,
it's such a powerful symbol
it is.
of these recurring droughts.
It really drives home that, climate change isn't some, distant threat.
Hmm.
This is a present reality
Right.
for millions of people,
Yeah.
directly impacting
Right.
their ability to, grow food and sustain their way of life.
And it's not just, one generation to the next, right? He's really talking about this, system of exploitation
Yeah,
that keeps these communities trapped.
absolutely.
And to illustrate this, we meet Maman Kathaka, this millet trader,
Right.
who reveals this really pretty shocking truth.
Yeah.
Nigerians are paying double for basic grains like millet compared to what, we pay for flour in the West.
It's a great point about these economic disparities
Yeah.
that are really at the heart of these issues as well.
Absolutely.
It's not simply about, a lack of food in the world.
Right.
It's about, well, who has access?
Exactly.
And can they afford it? And again, Bauer does this great job of, not letting us forget those, human faces
Right.
behind these, these statistics and figures.
Yeah.
And he shares this really powerful story, I think, of Binta, this Mauritanian woman
Yeah.
who's forced to, resort to these kind of heartbreaking measures just to shield her children from hunger.
It's one thing to, skip a meal here and there, but to have to go to those lengths as a parent.
Right. Can you imagine,
Yeah.
having to trick your children with empty pots at mealtime
Right.
just to spare them the pain of another hungry night?
It's just heartbreaking. And it's so powerful, I think, because then he takes us to Haiti, which seems like a very different place, but actually.
It's a really interesting parallel that he draws.
He does. Yeah, they're both grappling with this legacy of hunger and unfulfilled promises.
Absolutely. I mean, he does it, again, through this really poignant story of Serge,
Yeah.
this Haitian man who, as a child, actually witnessed, U.S. food aid arriving.
Okay.
And it felt, at the time like this sign of hope.
Yeah.
And then fast forward years later, and here he is, distributing surplus cornflakes
Wow.
as an adult.
Wow.
And it just speaks to how, even when aid is, I think often very well intentioned,
Right.
it can sometimes create these cycles of dependency,
Right.
and it doesn't always address those root causes.
Right. And often, these larger global forces at play.
Absolutely.
I mean, think about the impact of Bill Clinton's rice policies
Yeah.
on Haitian farmers.
Yeah.
Instead of bolstering, local agriculture, it flooded the market
Yeah, with these cheap imports.
with these really cheap imports.
Which really just put, Haitian farmers out of business.
It did. And it made them more reliant on that foreign aid.
It's a classic example, I think, of how these well-intentioned policies, can have unintended consequences.
They really can.
And often really devastating ones.
It's not just about, charity. This is about power.
Absolutely. It's about understanding those power dynamics that are at play
Yeah.
and how they can perpetuate these cycles of poverty.
And Bauer really brings that home with the concept of land grabs.
Yes, this is a big one.
Which we've talked about a little bit, but essentially you have countries that are desperate for economic development.
Oh, right.
They need money.
Right, often facing, mounting debt.
Yeah, and so they're selling off huge tracts of land
Yeah.
to foreign investors.
And Bauer uses these really kind of stark examples of Liberia and the Congo
Right.
to illustrate this. And it's one of those things where it's a very complex issue.
It is, because on the one hand, you have these large-scale agricultural projects that, they can create jobs.
Sure.
They can bring in some investment.
Right, and Bauer even introduces us to some South African farmers in the Congo,
Right.
some of whom seem very genuinely invested in building sustainable practices.
They do, yeah.
Right, so it's not always as straightforward
Right.
as sort of this is good, this is bad.
Right, right. And then there's the question, too, of, is this long-term? Does this actually benefit, the people in the communities where this is happening?
Exactly. Are they really benefiting?
Or are they being further entrenched in this system where they don't have any control?
Exactly. It's about, are we creating more dependency
Right.
rather than, sustainable solutions?
And that's what he was talking about, in those earlier chapters, about how reliance on food imports creates this incredible vulnerability.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, global prices, markets, if those get disrupted,
They have no control.
these countries have no control. And he even says it can fuel conflict.
It absolutely can.
And I keep thinking about that image of those young men in Liberia, the wheelbarrow boys, he called them,
Yeah.
who are, tampering with their measuring cups.
It's a powerful
And
image.
it's just to survive, just to try to eke out a little bit more.
And it really underscores, I think, how, this scarcity, which is often, driven by these larger forces,
Yes.
creates an environment where people are kind of, put in this impossible position
They are.
where, even to survive, they have to engage in kind of these, exploitative practices.
Right, and it really highlights, I think, how urgent it is that we find some solutions here.
Absolutely. Yeah, we need more equitable and sustainable solutions.
We do, and this is where I think Bauer really takes this kind of a somber turn as he really dives into this intersection of conflict and hunger.
Yeah.
And he does this by introducing us to, I mean, this is one for the books, Emperor Bokassa
Oh, yeah.
of the Central African Republic.
Talk about a story.
I mean, talk about really highlighting the extremes.
I mean, this is a dictator
yeah.
staging this lavish coronation.
With white horses? I mean, come on. It's like out of a movie.
Collapsing from the heat.
Well, people are, struggling to survive.
Right. Meanwhile, his people are, grappling with desperate poverty and hunger.
It's unbelievable. And then he says, quote, reasons of state Trump family. I mean, chilling.
Absolutely chilling. Just this complete disregard for human life.
But it's not, he's not just giving us this crazy story. He connects it.
No. He brings in the historical context.
To this legacy of colonialism.
Yeah.
What he calls the big starvation in the Central African Republic.
And this is where, I think Bauer really unpacks some things.
He does.
He talks about, how this system of forced labor and resource extraction, right?
Right. Driven by these foreign companies,
Yeah.
right? They have these huge concessions.
Yeah, these vast concessions from colonial powers.
Essentially engineered a famine.
Yeah. It's a chilling reminder, I think, of how, hunger can be a consequence of deliberate policies.
Right. It wasn't just, there wasn't enough.
Right. These are systems.
Systems designed to benefit a few.
Absolutely.
At the expense of so many.
And, it's not just a historical artifact either, right?
Right. This pattern.
It continues.
It continues. He fast forwards to the Salika Rebellion.
Yeah.
And paints this really, again, this really harrowing picture
Brutal.
of families, having to flee their homes.
Into the forest.
Taking refuge in the forest.
Surviving on bitter yams.
Just trying to survive. It really highlights that link.
Absolutely. This sort of inextricable link.
Between conflict and hunger.
Yeah, they feed off each other.
They do. They absolutely do. And he takes us to Syria.
Yeah.
And the siege of Homs, which he calls it Syria's Stalingrad.
Wow.
And, modern warfare, right?
Yeah.
Targeting
food systems.
Yeah,
as a tactic.
As a tactic of control.
Wow.
To just completely dismantle a society's ability to feed itself.
And leaving this legacy, right?
That extends far beyond the battlefield.
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking about shattered lives.
Yeah, he talks about the shortage of men in Syrian society because of the war.
Yeah.
A whole generation of children marked by malnutrition.
It's heartbreaking.
But even with all of that, he does start to move us towards some solutions.
Yeah, he does.
And this is where I think things get really interesting with technology.
Yeah.
Because he starts with this almost comical image, this edible drone.
The pouncer.
I
mean, come on.
That you're supposed to eat.
It sounds like science fiction.
I know. And I think it really highlights, right? Even with technology, sometimes we miss the mark.
Yeah, totally. And I think this really underscores his point about, we can't just throw technology at the problem.
Right.
We have to think about the context.
We do.
We have to think about, the ethical implications.
Right, because even something as simple as, mobile money transfers.
Right.
He talks about how, in the Congo, there was some resistance to that.
Yeah, people wanted to go back to the old system.
Bags of rice.
Yeah, they wanted the bags of rice.
They wanted the rice, which,
It's understandable in a way.
You can kind of understand it, yeah.
Yeah. But then on the other hand, I mean, he also talks about how, data-driven aid programs.
This is really fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Using AI.
Yeah, like that AI-assisted targeting system in Togo.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, that actually led to improvements.
Right. It helped get the aid to the people who needed it.
To the right people, which, is really the goal, right?
Absolutely. But even then, he says, we can't just get overly excited about AI because...
Yeah, there's always the risk of bias.
There is.
Right. AI is only as good as the data it's trained on.
Right. And it could actually end up hurting the people that it's supposed to be helping.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, we have to be very mindful of those limitations.
Yeah. And then he brings it, down to the grassroots, right?
Yeah. Which I love that he does this.
He does. He does. And this is where I think the story of Mizet, the Umbala pinda maker in the Congo,
Yeah, yeah.
this really stood out to me.
Such a powerful story. I mean, talk about resilience.
I know. This woman, starting with practically nothing,
Yeah.
proves everyone wrong.
All the skeptics
All the skeptics,
And-
builds this business
feeding thousands of kids every day.
with these basically peanut bars. I mean, it's amazing.
It's amazing. It's a testament to, what's possible with a little bit of ingenuity.
Right, and that you don't need these highfalutin solutions all the time.
Right.
Sometimes it's really about empowering
Absolutely.
the people on the ground.
Yeah, and I love that he brings it, closer to home too. He talks about the bushel and peck.
Oh, in West Virginia, right?
Yeah, in West Virginia.
This community food store.
Yeah, they turned basically a food desert
Yeah, it was a really struggling neighborhood.
into this thriving farmers market.
It's incredible. So, I mean, it's a lot to think about.
It is.
But it does, I think, leave you with a sense of, cautious optimism.
Yeah.
That there are things that we can do.
There are.
And it's not just about, these huge, insurmountable problems.
And I think that's really Bauer's message.
Yeah.
It's acknowledge the complexity.
Yeah.
Understand, the history.
The systemic issues.
Yeah.
But don't give up.
Yeah, don't give up.
Right. Because
There's still hope.
there is.
There is. We have to have hope.
Oh. And I think this deep dive really exemplifies that.
I agree.
So thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.